Really important question. I think given a lot of the prevailing narrative and commentary around like purpose fatigue and purpose washing, I think it's definitely worth emphasizing that purpose can and should um like always have a positive impact on the business as much as it should on society and the general environment, and intrinsic to the values really of the various different factors affecting the brand's customers, but also relevant and authentic to the supply chain, where they get materials and fuel from, for example, or the wider operating system, championing a cause that is relevant and the brand has a responsibility connection with, also matters to customers, and so that can help drive innovation, customer acquisition, affinity, and help deliver growth. And specifically on campaigns, there was a stat which came from Edelman, I think, around consumer expectation shifts, and like 78% of consumers believe that brands should help solve some of the societal and environmental issues, especially if those are ones that they create to a certain degree or they're involved in as part of that, wider ecosystem and value chain. And we know that 64% of Gen Z and millennials will buy or boycott based on brand values, and that's come from various sort of surveys. So for campaigns, I think if there is why media campaigns should have a clear sense of purpose or champion cause is because they really risk irrelevance, do you know what I mean? Or potentially even worse if they're not connecting with the values and the things that matter to their target customers and audiences, but also thinking about how they can encourage innovation across the business by looking at their value chain and their operating ecosystem and how they can do that in collaboration with customers owners through their campaigns. The other thing as well, sort of tied to that, is it's incredibly noisy at the moment. There is so much content out there. It's increasingly being driven and filtered by algorithms across social media, and AI will mean that can just get proliferated at an extraordinary rate. Interactions and the touch points between brand and its customers are even more proliferated and much more fragmented than they were before. And so there's always that little bit of being a step removed actually from forming that direct connection. And so purpose really then acts as the platform to really sort of cut through meaningfully and actually almost circumvents potentially the algorithms and the challenges and the touch points, because it resonates emotionally with people. And so, people actually seek that content out and will want to engage with it more. And the brand recall is stronger, and obviously earned media is much stronger as well. So, Kantar, there's lots of research from Kantar, for example, that proves purpose-led campaigns will drive better results. There's higher brand lifts, higher purchase intent, and sort of share of voice. Yeah, there's a few of these. I mean, of course, a big challenge is being accused of purpose washing and inauthenticity. Where it's clear that there's no relevance to the brand or the organization in any way around the purpose or the cause that it's championing, you risk turning off consumers. The authenticity could have wider impacts on the brand once that is recognized and actually called out. We have a lot more activism from consumers and audiences where they feel purpose is being hijacked, or there is, virtue signaling, so to speak, or things are done inauthentically. That can be really harmful actually to the wider brand perception and performance. Everything from people picketing the brand to just not engaging with the concept or the campaign. So consumer skepticism is a risk there. There's always a challenge, I think, in terms of internal alignment around the purpose. So, on one hand, and the cause, on one hand, may have the brand and the marketing teams saying this is really important for the organization. We have a relevancy and authenticity to speak here. It matters to our customers. But in order to really deliver on the proposition and the promise behind the campaign, that might mean changes in the organization's HR or supply chain or exec level buy-in. And if you don't have that alignment, I think, across the business, you then have purpose existing in silos, which isn't just an authenticity problem. It's a problem being able to realize on whatever is put forward as part of the campaign. If they're helping a particular community or looking to innovate and changing their products or, create less carbon emissions, if the whole business isn't aligned around that message and that campaign, then it's not real and it's not going to get delivered on, which is not just going to affect consumers' skepticism and engagement, but it just means also the campaign will not be effective and will never be realized. There is the complexity, I think, of like the polarization that's going on in the world. There's also commercial pressures because a lot of purpose and cause campaigns and activity is about long-term benefit, and it really should be about long-term sustainable change and positive impact. And our industry, our sector, and many of the pressures that our brand and marketing colleagues face are very short-term pressures, particularly given the current economic climate. So there is again that challenge for alignment internally around something that is a long-term strategic play for the business in its entirety versus the immediate commercial pressures. And then based on that long-term plays, they're the infrastructure and media supply chain to actually support the campaign with regards to reaching those audiences, targeting people in the right way, managing things. If it's, say, for example, managing hate speech or, high carbon emissions, is that structure and infrastructure there across the media supply chain? I would say Unilever to a certain extent. Obviously, years ago they had the SDLP, I think it was called, but they have a lot of brands that put purpose really at the core, as you said, of what they do, but it's also a strategic platform and drives strategic direction, not just of brand and brand communications, but actually of what the business does in terms of products and growth strategy. So I mean, Dove, for example, 20 years running the Real Beauty movement challenge and evolving that every year, and that's real commitment to the long-term piece that I mentioned before, and understanding where they can authentically and relevantly speak to that cause and why it should also matter to the business, irrelevant of what the audience feels about the state of the beauty industry or cosmetics, because there's a responsibility that they understand they have there. Ben and Jerry's is another really famous brand in Unilever where purpose is completely driving what the business does, and there's sort of a brilliant story of the founders and sort of their involvement and their sort of drive really to have a business that's as good for society and as it is for its customers as it is for helping helping drive growth and benefit for themselves. And so it really balances product and profit and its social mission, particularly around tackling injustice and climate change, is quite bold in its activism, when a lot of brands aren't. Patagonia is another good example. B Corp. It is also, I think, like a benefit corporation. They're very focused on, because that is all about exploration and nature. Their purpose is, okay, how do you also make sure that the planet is sustainable? There's no harm being done to our home planet, so to speak. And so there's that drives their product innovation, but it also drives their corporate structure, the activism, all their messaging, things like the fact you can get something repaired at any time with Patagonia. And I think sort of held up as a bastion for that in terms of sustainability. When it comes to, I guess, the agency side, you've got a few companies, so like Good Loop. Don't know if you've heard of them. They're a media agency, and they convert sort of everyday media consumption, into real world impact. And so they build features like Watch to Donate formats and carbon tracking tools and open dashboards as part of their core product. There's also Media Bounty, and they're all about ethical and creative storytelling. Sustainable media placements. They are also the founders of the Conscious Advertising Network, so have actually really worked hard to give back into the wider ecosystem they exist in of the industry to ensure that there is more I just guess responsible and sustainable business in every field, from the environment to social impact and so on. Obviously, there's like inclusion, equality, and representation, not just in content and media planning, but also in the supply chain and the partners and the publishers that form part of that ecosystem. How are we ensuring that we're making an ecosystem where there is opportunity for all, and actually we're encouraging people from different groups and different communities to contribute and to be a part of it. Child safety and well-being, and the protection of vulnerable groups from like harmful content, hate speech, and misinformation, stepping forward and doing more to sort of and it's not about policing freedom of speech, it's just making sure people are safe and can enjoy the experience of engaging with brand content, the experience of surfing the internet, connecting with people without fear of harm. Sustainability, of course, making sure that we are more transparent on our supply chains, trying to minimize the pollution environment, and so complying with legislation, for example. So any sort of existing or upcoming legislation that seeks to reduce environmental impact of media and advertising across the supply chain is something we should all be working towards. But I'll go with the first one just because I was fortunate enough to judge it at Eurobest, and actually really left me with quite a deep personal impact, just because of how brilliant the campaign was and how impactful it was. And it's a company called ANZ Health. The campaign's called 188 How to Quit. Are you familiar with it? And it's basically how to quit opioids. And we're all familiar with the opioid epidemic in the US, and like how it's basically just devastating not just individual lives, but like families, like whole towns, right? And the impact that it's having on the economy, and for various different reasons, not really being addressed or resolved. What was really great about this campaign is just the simplicity and also the innovation, and the understanding of the experience that those sufferers of opioid addiction are having, right? And how is the right way to help them. And it's that whole point of sort of turning the object of addiction into the way out of addiction and out of crisis, and reaching people at their most critical moment, when they have the pill in their hand, and that itself actually being media. So media at the point of crisis, I personally think was brilliant. It was subtle, it was empathetic, it really understood where people really need the most help and how to sort of deliver it to them, because there was the number that was on, obviously, where the pills are printed, that people could call and speak to someone who had the same addiction journey and made their way through it. And so that was first-hand experience of someone who understands what you're feeling at that moment in time, helping to guide you away from that point of tension, but also then giving people who have recovered, made their way through it, a chance to give back and contribute. So just this net positive loop being created out of it. And then the whole 360 of the campaign. So strategic placement of adverts in areas where are relevant to opioid use, near pharmacies or meeting places. Just really, really smart use of media, subtle and empathetic way to reach people at the point of crisis, and navigate them out of that situation. I thought it was brilliant. And then the other bit was a piece of me. It's a campaign for KPN, which we did at Dentsu. I think it's the biggest service provider in Holland. And at Dentsu, we've been working with them on the brand platform, which is for a better internet. And they all believe that the internet should go back to what it was originally designed to be, which is a place that we could all sort of enjoy, that was more safe, socially inclusive, and ultimately more sustainable. And in order to sort of like bring that to life in a campaign in a relevant way, particularly thinking of the audiences that they would need for that whole point of sort of sustainable growth and future audiences. We helped them focus on Gen Z, which was their sort of exponentially growing customer base that they had, and also the families and the parents of Gen Z as well. And as part of the research into the brand platform, we discovered that like one in 100 young people had experienced their intimate images being shared online without their consent. And that's obviously the stat from Holland, but it's a global issue, and the consequences are terrifying, really. Everything from bullying to shaming, depression, loneliness, suicide. And as a parent, that was just, I mean, there are no words to describe it when you hear about that, right? And so, and the KPN thought, well, if we're for a better internet and that's our audience, like, how do we find a way of meaningfully playing a part to combat this? So, like, we developed the brand campaign with them to help raise awareness and combat specifically online shaming, and people sharing content without consent, and talking about the damage it creates for our young people, using music, partnering with Spotify, and the music artist named Mode. It was used in schools as part of an educational tool. And then also, there are conversations coming out of Mobile World Congress where more mobile and internet partners globally are thinking, how do they sign up and support the cause? So much is spoken about, obviously, the responsibility of the platforms, the technologies providers, the various actors that are creating the content, but it's all done in a sort of way that feels there's no agency from human beings who are engaging and resharing it. And ultimately, there is. We can decide we're not going to engage with harmful content when we see it. We can decide we're not going to reshare it. And that's what this campaign did, in control of how this is affecting them, rather than everybody just feeling, oh, we're just overwhelmed by this. There's nothing we can do, because we actually can, but it's not often re-emphasized to us that we can.